So, Malcolm, welcome to Def and Talk Show, EuroClojure live edition. So this is the first time we're trying to record video as well, so it's going to be tricky. We hope it's going to turn out okay, but we never know. Anyway, so we spoke to John yesterday. We had an interesting discussion with him about his experience with Clojure, and he told us that you were the one of the guys who made him start Juxt and
Yes.
pull him into Clojure. So can you give us some idea about how did you start with Clojure and Juxt and what are you working on these days? Some ideas about your projects.
Yeah, I mean, Juxt started, really the two of us were in separate banks and we didn't know of each other's existence, but we had very, very similarly named blog articles and we and so we sort of bumped into one another and it was a time when we were, later on and when we both left the banks, we could have decided, well, you didn't want to leave Clojure. We had Clojure teams. What do we do? So, and we kind of discovered Clojure was a really secret and a very effective weapon to solve lots of the problems they have in banks. So we thought, well, that might be generally applicable elsewhere. So, and that's why we started Juxt.
So now you're kind of doing Juxt, and that's I think that's a great thing of putting Clojure people in touch with the needs out there. But the project that you've been working on kind of mostly recently has been the Yada project. So it would be really good if you could give us just like a background of it. What motivated you to do it? What's the name? Yeah, why the name? So tell us everything. And you've got 5 minutes, go.
Well, I mean, a lot of our projects in Juxt are of similar architectures. We love APIs, we love the integration of using the web stack and how that's driving a lot of the economy now and making integration between companies so much more viable. And so because it's such a common thing that we do, we want to be able to industrialize it and give people the ability to create APIs super quickly. And we think Clojure's a great platform to do that on. I'm a bit of an HTTP geek. I've been fairly disappointed by, I like to implement standards properly, and I feel HTTP is such a big standard, and it's almost impossible to ask developers and organizations to implement all of HTTP. In fact, they should be thinking about their application domain and not be protocol network engineers. And so Yada and similar libraries like Liberator are trying to bring web developers kicking and screaming halfway to HTTP purity. And also to exploit all of the advantages of HTTP that many people don't know. So that's the point of Yada, to make it quick and easy to implement HTTP, but in a way that doesn't sacrifice performance and scalability. So that's been why Yada's been taking me a long time to develop. I've been working on it almost 2 years, and before that thinking about it a lot. But it has been a bit of a labour of love for me that I've been doing kind of whilst doing other project work. But it's true to say that a lot of our projects are in the trenches, and that's really the best place to, necessity is the mother of invention. So when we find that we need something and we build it and we think, well, we need something like this in a more general place, we kind of go off and write it. And so that's really where the libraries come from.
Maybe you probably don't want to cause too much controversy, but what the hell? What was what was wrong with what was already there? And we can think about other languages or other stacks, but what's wrong with the kind of stuff that's already there in the Clojure system that you wanted to improve with Yada? What was the kind of the motivation for just doing something new?
I think a lot of the libraries really let you start you at this kind of CGI interface where you get the request and then your job is to create the response. So there's not a lot of support for doing HTTP fully in content negotiation, conditional requests, caching, ranges, partials. There's loads of things in the HTTP specification. It's just so hard for people to implement. So that was the real motivation, to try and rather than create it in a modular way where we pick and choose which bits of the specification we want, I really kind of try to wrap the whole of the specification in one library, so that you just use that library and you get HTTP asynchronously. So, yeah.
Okay. Do you want to? Okay, do it, Matt. Yeah.
So,
Hold the mic.
no. So before creating Yara, I mean, so I assume you're using it already in your projects right now. So before creating it, which stack were you using? And the projects that you're using, can you give us an example of a stack? Like what is the database and what kind of solutions that you propose to your clients?
Well, before Yada, and it's not as if we're using Yada on all of our projects, and we're maintaining other projects that before. We used a whole mixture of things. We've used EuroClojure API from Tommy Riemann. We used a lot of Pedestal, actually, and the Pedestal interceptors. We've used Plain Ring and other things too, and Liberator. And it's partly that was kind of the drive of actually using all these different libraries that did different things. It was kind of, well, why can't we just have one library? So I just built another one. So now we have, even more. But that was really the coming off a project where we had so many different ways of doing things. I thought we just need to consolidate that, because otherwise we're just going to have, too many of these things.
And I mean, HTTP itself, especially from version 1 to version 1.1, there's been a static protocol, a static standard for a long time, but you'll know that it was recently agreed that there will be a new standard called HTTP 2. Google have done a lot of work on this. It's being adopted by the browser manufacturers as well. Is this something, I'm kind of springing this on you, but what the hell? Is this something which you're kind of thinking about, or is this the kind of thing that, you're going to wait a little while until other stuff settles down or infrastructure gets good, or, what's your kind of feeling about HTTP 2?
Yeah. I mean, there are aspects of HTTP 2 which are more at the network level, and I know there's support for HTTP in Netty, which is the server that Yada is built on through Aleph. So that is the stack, and things like HTTP 2 requires or pretty much requires HTTP-S and transport level security. But things like server push as well, that's almost at the network end. So there aren't too many things that have changed in the what's called semantics and content of HTTP that are that different in HTTP 2. So I don't think it's going to be a lot of work to adopt it from what I've read of it.
Because I noticed from Google's side, for instance, they have this gRPC, and that seems, in terms of like implementing WebSocket style interactions, because obviously the problem with WebSockets was that it was nice, it was a byte, you suddenly went to TCP/IP, you got a multiplex, and you got very nice speeds up and downstream. But the problem was that you kind of lost a lot of protocol, you lost a lot of visibility, and everything kind of went away. So it's a valid thing to do because firewall-friendly things, WebSockets. But it seems like HTTP 2 will standardize that a little bit. Is that something? Because that definitely seems to be changing the way that you program it at that point. Or maybe WebSockets aren't interesting at the moment. I don't know.
I mean, WebSockets is where you leave the HTTP protocol, and so you upgrade and you switch. And much of the impetus is to have very fast, low latency for message passing for games and so on. So, I've tended to ignore WebSockets and seeing that as a network upgrade, but I want to concentrate on things that are in the HTTP and HTML space, which is things like server-sent events, and server push in HTTP 2 makes that the pushing of content makes for a very very fast and performant low latency experience on the web. So it's possible that you can build very interactive experiences without requiring WebSockets, and with the advantages of all of the security, authentication, authorization that you have already built in HTTP, and years of known security and deployment issues that have been fixed. So I think there's a lot of value in HTTP, and allowing more people to stay within the fold is valuable.
So when people are writing their HTTP APIs, they often want to do documentation around them, and people using stuff like Swagger and stuff like that. Is that something which you you integrate with as well?
Yeah, I mean, Yada does Swagger out of the box. You can just say, okay, I want to take this API and I want a Swagger document. And because Yada is very much data declared in data, the Swagger transformation to the Swagger description is just really a function transformation. Yada makes use of Ring Swagger, which is Metasyn's library for doing transformation between prismatic schema and the JSON schema format that's used by Swagger. So Yada has always had support for Swagger. In fact, it was one of the first features I implemented when it was experimental. But I have mixed feelings about Swagger. It's pragmatically useful, but HTTP is really about dynamic discovery, and the point is to allow a user agent to discover new things about if the server does change, that through discoverability and observability, the client can say, aha, I know there's a link called foo, but now it's pointing at a different URL, I'll follow that. So it's really putting up signposts for the client to navigate what's new about a server. And that's not a new idea. Humans do that on Facebook. I mean, when Facebook do a new release, I think they do a lot of new releases every week. They don't have to notify everybody that there's going to be a new release of Facebook. You just cope with it. And so those coping mechanisms are built into HTTP by delivering links, by negotiating media types. And so in that world, it should be unnecessary to have out-of-band documentation through Swagger. However, there's an interesting thing that one of our Juxt associates, Oliver Hine, is doing, which is using the Swagger documentation as a media type in its own right, actually downloading it in clients and being able to utilize it to allow clients to call links and discover it. So there's certainly not it's not a kind of clear black and white where Swagger is out of band. It can be used very effectively in band, which is quite a new and novel idea.
Yeah. I think. Do you think probably the whole Swagger thing and the whole REST API thing is somehow developers want to have let's say, an easy thing rather than a simple thing, or they definitely want something where they can grapple with, and the most popular APIs have been fairly static, even from Google and Facebook and Twitter. So more philosophical, maybe, as a final question, because I really like, we really want to extend this conversation, during the podcast proper, if you'll be happy to do that. But it would be nice to have a little philosophical question about, why is that such a problem? Do we think, why is HTTP itself actually is kind of like, failure is too strong a word, but why has it failed to sort of rest, and the whole concept failed to kind of grasp this, or why have the developer community failed to grasp this whole notion of this discoverability? Because I agree with you, but I also see it, that in reality it just hasn't worked.
Yeah, I think it's really the answer to that question is more cultural. We want things now. We want we want our systems to be delivered in 3 weeks or yesterday, and we're the fast food generation, and we don't want to wait. And so that you get that instant gratification if you can get a document and hard code a URL for list of users or something. You hard code that, and then of course as soon as you hard code URLs, then if the server then changes, you've broken. So you're actually, by adding discoverability into your API, you're paying it forward, where you're getting the payback is in, maybe 1 or 2 or 5 years down the line. And so, but I think it's because there's so much emphasis on doing things now, we tend to pay for it, with compound interest much later on.
So is this a perfect case for mortgage-driven development then?
Yeah, very much so.
Thank you for getting back, so you knew all that stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. Just a quick final comment, though. So that obviously you're the sponsors for the conference. Thanks a lot for that. And I'm guessing you guys are hiring, probably. So yeah, we'll try to put the word out there. And you're primarily doing just Clojure. Right. Yeah. So we'd love to have you on a podcast if you're interested, because I know that combined Juxt associate experience in Clojure is way beyond the roof. Yeah. So as we were talking to John yesterday, like he built this stuff a long time ago, 3-4 years in the Clojure world. It's pretty long time ago. because I used to follow his blog on, Clojure at a bank and Clojure at a publishing house and all that stuff. So we'd really like to have you on the show, and thanks a lot for doing this, by the way.
Yeah, we'd love to come along and we'll do a nice long podcast next time.
Right. Thanks a lot, man.
Thank you, Rick.
Okay, cheers.